Back at home, the Zuma Foundation says countries such as China and Russia must be applauded for standing up against the Western world. In a statement, the foundation says the conflict between Ukraine and Russia has exposed the hypocrisy of favoring the West's bullying tendencies. The foundation accused the West of wanting to further their own agendas and interests. It adds that Russian President Vladimir Putin has been patient with Western forces. The foundation believes Putin has always been firm on his position of the eastern expansion of NATO into the Ukraine. It says there are clear examples that NATO forces are trying to invade the Middle East as well as Africa. Now, the mounting calls for South Africa to take a clear stance in the Russia-Ukraine conflict. This after South Africa abstained from voting during the United Nations General Assembly motion calling for Russia's withdrawal from Ukraine. For more on this, we are now joined by DA International Relations Minister Darren Bergman and International Relations expert Dr. Charles Sinkala. You're a part of the conversation tonight on 072-110-5584 or tweet us tonight at Newzroom 405. How important is the absolute solidarity of the UN Assembly in the Russia-Ukraine conflict? And is it cowardice for South Africa to seek to avoid irritating Russia on this particular matter? Gentlemen, good evening and thank you very much for your time and joining us tonight here on In Focus. Darren, let's start with you. You've issued a statement as a Democratic Alliance strongly condemning the abstention of South Africa in the UN General Assembly vote. How important do you think it was that all countries represented in the UN show solidarity, except those who are really clearly aligned to Russia?
Good evening, Talbot, to you and your listeners. I must say that, this is an opportune time for the government to actually just pick a side and not stay on the fence, which I believe is the weakest position one can take. And they chose an opportunity to miss an opportunity, I think, and this is a problem that, we need to be more clear, and we need to either choose violence or peace. I think those are the two sides that was the votes that was on the table, and I think we didn't go for peace.
Yeah. South Africa believes that they've clearly put their argument on the table on why we need to be careful in order to be able to bring both parties onto the table, and both parties will be able to listen to the voice of South Africa in this mediation. If they take side right now, that would indeed jeopardize those efforts. What do you make of that reasoning?
You see, the problem with mediation is that you're talking about lives being lost as the days go by. This is an escalation that's taking place. The mediation should have taken place weeks ago, if not months ago. The time for mediation, I probably even say the time for sanctions was weeks ago. There's an escalation now in violence and death, and every day we delay calling out Russia, we are allowing something to happen that should not be happening on a world stage in this time of history. And we cannot allow in good conscience any country to sit on a fence at this stage. They should be clear. I note with sadness that the Zuma Foundation has joined the fray. Obviously, the oligarchs of South Africa joined the oligarchs of Russia. And this is another sad moment in South Africa. It would probably raise another lot of tweets, embarrassing tweets on our timeline, where we can see that South Africa, our foreign international presence, once again is being laughed at and being trampled on.
Dr. Sinkala, real human lives being affected here. Does the South Africa response fail to take this into account as far as the moral question is concerned? But maybe even broadly, let's ask the question, is the Russia-Ukraine conflict a geopolitical problem, as I suppose the Zuma Foundation would like to believe, or is it a moral one?
Yes, thank you very much, Tabo, for having me. Yes, for one to understand, especially what we've been going through in the world in the past couple of weeks and maybe months or more, that misinformation by so-called analysts or consultants or those who are commenting about the laws, I think to some extent they lack the knowledge or the understanding of the international law. They fail to understand the geopolitics. They fail to understand the social and economic or politics relating to the conflicts in Ukraine and Russia. What they are getting is the narrative that the United States of America, at the hands of their state, lied to the world that it's actually Russia which is invading Ukraine. But if you look at those dynamics that I've explained, one will understand that Ukraine is actually a platform for Russia, European Union, United States of America, and NATO. They are fighting on. So, the Zuma Foundation, they're very strategic to say that what they have said. And I think the world's supposed to be talking, in terms of not propagating the propaganda and misinformation which has been going on, and not analyzing the situation, and as well as the history of those involved, especially the United States of America, who has from time and again has been involved in countries, and those countries that they've been involved in, they've left nothing but bloodshed and the loss of lives. We can talk about the invasion of Iraq, the invasion of Libya, the invasion of Syria, the invasion of Afghanistan, and many other countries that are in lineup for them to pursue that agenda. So I have to confess that I've met the ambassador to South Africa, the Ukrainian ambassador to South Africa. I've also tabled my invitation to the ambassador to Russia to hear both sides of the stories. And my conclusion, I can see that both sides also lack some information in terms of to really understand what are the dynamics, what caused the conflicts. And for every conflict, and the third law of conflict is that there's a third party involved. And if you look very quickly, Tibos, that leading to the 5 days which we are having in Ukraine, who went there to Ukraine first? It's not Russia who went there to Ukraine first. It's United States of America and the NATO and the European Union. In fact, the European Union, which United Kingdom has removed their membership in the Brexit saga. They are pursuing Ukraine to join, and it is quite unfortunately that we are only spreading the word that Russia has invaded, forgetting that the war is against Russia and the West.
We'll continue in a moment. Get a reaction there from dear Shadow Minister of International Relations, Darren, in a moment. And, of course, ask further questions and probe as to South African ties with Russia. Are they in jeopardy? Are they at risk if indeed they pick a side here? And what could that possibly mean? Okay, you can give us your views and your comments tonight on 072-110-5584 or tweet us at Newzroom405. Back in a moment. Tonight on In Focus, Newzroom Afrika Channel 405, and the conflict in Russia and Ukraine under the spotlight. This as South Africa has abstained from voting in that UN General Assembly vote for condemning Russia's invasion into the Ukraine. Many have been calling for South Africa to take a clear stance in the matter. Shadow Minister for International Relations and Cooperation, Darren Bergman, still with us, and international relations expert, Dr. Charles Sinkala. So, Darren, a real threat, according to Dr. Sinkala, exists within Russia, coming from NATO, who has been, I suppose, slowly encroaching on Russian territory and very close to that border and setting up its missiles. And there is a real risk of an attack.
Look, I think the threat has come from weakness in NATO and a weakness in the EU in identifying Putin or understanding Putin. I don't entirely disagree with the professor in the sense that there has been an encroachment. The encroachment, if you look in the boundaries of Russia, is no different to if you had the NATO in Ukraine to where NATO exists currently on the borders of Russia. But the war in Ukraine started not months ago, it started years ago in 2014 with the Crimean Peninsula. And when the world was silent over Russia taking over the Crimean Peninsula, they've been silent with Russia handing out passports willy-nilly to the Donbas regions. And we in the DA have been calling out the fact that this is going to be a rescue operation from Putin when he comes to rescue his people from the Donbas region. We've been calling this out. time and time again. And this script is not a new script that originated all of a sudden. It's the same script that was played out from the Georgian territories where Putin went there. Now, this must be the exact time in history, 1937, around there with the Sudetenland. You know, when Hitler started going for the Sudetenland, and everyone's going, but, you know, this is an encroachment maybe from America and from from France and from England. This might be the hesitation that we're seeing now and the lack of decisive action, and NATO saying, well, we'll start with sanctions and let's see what happens. Maybe the Ukraine is the Sudetenland, because Ukraine is not NATO, as we can clearly see at this stage. And yet what we're seeing, and what the DA has been calling for, because let me tell you, the DA is not tone deaf to what's happening in South Africa in terms of Russian allegiance, both in BRICS and historic relationships with the ANC. But what we have to call out is the fact that both countries need to adhere to the Geneva Code of Convention and international law. Both countries need to stick to the Libre Code of what weapons are used.
Yeah.
And both countries should be minimizing life or trying to get around the negotiating table on as quickly as possible.
Yeah. So Darren, if I may ask, sorry, if I can come in here, are you calling for South Africa to side with the Ukraine, or are you just calling for South Africa to take any side and come out clearly on which side they follow? Well,
before it was a war, we were clear on South Africa using the opportunity to speak to Russia, to engage with Russia, to depressurize the temperatures in the cabin, so to speak, and use their proximity to Putin to basically get concessions. We never told them what side to take at that stage because of their, the past and their history there. When it became clear that there's a potential for nuclear war, or World War III, which is what we're looking at, and that's where the professor and I are both going in terms of the severity of where we go now. This is where we have to take a stand. And the stand is you either support the withdrawal of Russia, which is the Minister Naledi Pandor's call, and that's a decisive call of peace, or you go with the President's wishy-washy and the Ambassador of South Africa to the UN's wishy-washy, which is almost the support of war, because it doesn't lack any substance. And that's where we're clear in saying, you're either for peace or you're for war. And I would rather live in a South Africa that chooses peace over war.
Is South Africa, Dr. Sinkala, in an awkward diplomatic situation here? South Africa has, of course, as we know, been avoiding directly condemning Moscow, and they've also not taken the side of the Ukraine. Now, some may argue that South Africa has got some ties with the U.S. South Africa also enjoys very ties with individual EU nations. So in many regards, it also has ties within the EU as an institution itself. Is South Africa facing a diplomatic situation here? Should it pick any side?
Yes, Tabo, it's quite a difficult predicament for South Africa. I see they have made 3 statements, like what my fellow panelists has indicated. One from the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Naledi Pandor, the other one from the permanent representative to the United Nations. The President as well had his own view. But I will concur with the view by the permanent representative to the United Nations from South Africa, which was the view of a neutral point, regardless of the allies, whether in BRICS or any other relations with Russia or Ukraine or United States of America or EU. But the fact is, you and I, or everybody who's listening, we do not know what is happening. We do not know who's the aggressor. We do not know who's the victim. But what we know is that the conflict is being fought on the soil of Ukraine. And knowing the background and the history of those who are participating, who has meant nothing but the destruction and lies at the hands of the state, it becomes difficult. But South Africa's position should be a neutral position. It shouldn't be a position like what the text by the United Nations Security Council to side or to vote for the reprimand of Russia. I've practiced in law and I've consulted on many platforms. I've observed what court processes goes for and how it goes. There's nowhere I've heard a judge in court asking the people who are present in the court, including the advocates, if that person, they should vote against that person, whether it's guilty or not. There's no such things like that. Yeah. Every process has to be subjected to investigation to really know and understand what has gone wrong, respecting the law of conflict.
Dr. Sinkala, sorry, let me come here. Are you saying, therefore, political clarity is more important than the moral clarity question right now?
Of course. We would like to know why the conflict is there. Tabo, there's nothing which happens all of a sudden. Everything happens by appointment. There's no such thing like provocation. Once somebody is involved in war, there's something they are fighting for. Nobody fights for nothing. United States of America in the last 8 months, they have spent $1 billion in terms of aid to Ukraine. And this aid is actually, they are sending invoices to Ukraine to recover that money, because they are not just doing that for charity. But if we look at the narrative in terms of how the geopolitics are and the poverty on the continent, especially in Africa, and specifically Zimbabwe, where they have had sanctions from the United States, if they mean good to the people of Ukraine, they should have taken a step to mitigate the risk between the loss of lives and the two countries. But the text by the United Nations Security Council indicates clearly that there is a division, and I think they are biased in terms of putting up a motion to reprimand Russia rather than to build bridges that will stop the conflicts. Now they are escalating the conflicts. Hence you can see now President Zelensky now is fighting with NATO, because President Zelensky requested that the NATO should ban the airspace, but the NATO have seen the powerfulness or the effectiveness of the military of Russia. They said it would be, blood war. A lot of countries shall be involved. Hence, they are retreating at this time and moment.
Yeah. Darren, UN clearly biased in this matter. What's your position on that? And, of course, the question on the political clarity being more important in this instance, more than the moral question which you raise.
Well, the UN, I've been trying to call for reform in the UN for a long time. For a long time, it's been a political court. And I think we're seeing that in February with no one better person than President Putin being the president of the Security Council at the time. So when you're looking for a watchdog with teeth, we don't have that, as you can see. And NATO, you've got the European Union buying its gas and oil from Russia, so it's almost counterproductive to a NATO. You have this trade going on, which is building Russia, which should in itself be diplomacy, which would then negate the fact of having a NATO. But then you have Russia going into Ukraine. Now, I state this very clearly, that Russia is not an enemy of the DA going into this. At the beginning, it's a case of trying to get people around a table and get a peaceful resolution as quickly as possible. That NATO has made mistakes, the US has made mistakes on their own, that Russia has made mistakes, and Ukraine itself has made mistakes. But when it comes to the conflict itself, the invasion itself, it's very clear the DA's call that you need to do whatever you can in your might as quickly as possible to stop this conflict before it escalates. You're dealing with powers that have nuclear powers. They're not short of the nuclear powers. They could basically reach the whole world with their nuclear powers. They could change the face of this globe with their 4,000 nuclear rockets.
Yeah. And
so,
is that not precisely what some are arguing, Darren, to say this argument of the DA is exactly what's going to put South Africa in trouble? In fact, South Africa's prime moral obligation is to protect our citizens here in the country. And if that means staying silent and not irritating Vladimir Putin and his 4,000 missiles, so be it.
Well, to take a stand when you're with the rest of the world, I've put it to my chairperson in international relations when he asked what were the crosses next to the name of the people that voted in the UN. And I said, Chair, those with the crosses next to the name are the ones that voted wrong. When history judges us, do we want to be on the side when children and future people living in this world look at how people voted in the UN? Do we want to look like we pandered to a country because of our loyalty to them, or do we want to look like a country that took a stand, like we wanted countries to take a stand for us when we were fighting apartheid? And I think what we need to realize here is that if this war escalates any further, it will have an effect on South Africa, not because of just Russia, but because, first of all, Ukraine is a big exporter of commodities on its own that we use. Russia is an exporter of commodities that we use. We can already see the fuel prices already shooting up. We can ill afford that in our economy. So we're suffering, and we're going to suffer more in an economy that already hasn't been user-friendly, consumer-friendly for the last 2 or 3 years for us. So we're suffering now, and our government needs to take our concerns into account as well. So we're not in the direct target line of Russia. Yeah. I think Russia worries more about the big players in the middle field of what they're saying. But here we have an opportunity to make our country know that we do right by them.
All right. Final word from you, Dr. Sinkala. Can South Africa manage to maintain walking this tightrope of mostly avoiding taking a particular position? And why must South Africa take the tightrope, considering the impact of it? I saw one headline, I don't know whether it's just being alarmist, that the price of petrol could possibly reach 40 rands per litre. If we are going to be suffering such severe repercussions from what's going on because of our reliance, for example, on energy coming from outside of South Africa when it comes to oil, petroleum in particular. Can South Africa maintain this tightrope?
Yes, Thabo, they can maintain, and I think they should stick to the neutrality of this conflict, because one, they do not have anybody on the ground to investigate these crimes, and if they take side, for instance, to Russia, they will create enemies. On the other side, those who are supporting the European Union or Ukraine or United States. And if they take the other side, they will also be victimized from the other side, not only knowing who is wrong and who is right. And I think the stance should be in terms of calling for diplomatic calls and negotiations between the two countries. And I think the third parties who are involved, the European Union, the NATO, the United States of America, should leave the negotiations to the Russian President Putin, and as well as his counterpart, President Zelensky, to look at the losses of what they have done. And as well, the world has to look at that the word invasion of Ukraine is a wrong word. Russia did not go to United States of America or to UK or to come to South Africa. Russia is within its own territory. And I think those countries and European Unions and United States should withdraw before they can attempt to call Russia to withdraw.
Gentlemen, I appreciate your time. Thanks so much for coming on tonight and helping us in this conversation. Dear Shadow Minister for International Relations and Corporations, Darren Bergman, as well as International Relations expert, Dr. Charles Sinkala.